is, perfect punctuation wise and spelling, and one final syntax check. Then when I get it back from the,
Do you want to avoid YouTube this week and talk about that, or you want to wait till next week?
no, I'm on YouTube. But I just, once I get the book back, just so people know how that works, when I get the book back from the editor, which should be probably maybe up to a week. He works pretty quickly. This isn't a big book. Then I do one final comb through and see if there's anything I forgot, anything I want to include, anything I might want to take out, and then off to the publishing. So I'm looking forward to it. This is not a big book. It's called The Biden Coup: The Social Political Consequences of an Illegitimate Regime. And the way I'm going to promote it this time is very simple. I'm literally going to send, because it's not expensive for me to do this as the publisher, I'll send ebook copies and even some softcover copies to various people that I'd like to interview me. Just give them the book and let them decide. And, it doesn't cost me a lot out of pocket to do it that way. And I already have a list of people that I'd like to reach. I'd obviously love to be on with Steve Bannon, but there is a list of others. And I think that it's topical because we'll be discussing not just the election and what happened. And I think that, let's face it, a recent poll in Massachusetts showed that 70% of Republicans in this state do not believe that the election was legitimate. I think it's time, a year later, to have a national discussion about this. It's just that simple. It can't be put under the carpet forever. And the other issue that I get into in the book is what I call Trump derangement. This very strange and irrational hatred for Trump that almost takes on, like, people get physically upset. I've seen this so many times at the mere mention of his name. And I have theories about that. I happen to believe that it might have something to do with techniques of mass mind control. But I get into that.
Normal cognitive dissonance. I mean, normally you would think a public figure, but it's within the realm of normal cognitive dissonance.
No, there's something more than normal about this. I understand normal.
I would call abnormal cognitive dissonance, but the process could be explained just through cognitive dissonance, that Trump causes such cognitive dissonance in people.
No, but the thing is, I don't think it's Trump that's causing it. That's my point. I think that there is a conspiracy on the part of people who want to stop Trump, who are applying techniques that were learned really going all the way back in history, but I think particularly were learned during the Nazi period, that are able to manipulate massive numbers of people emotionally, to make them think a certain thing and to react in a certain way that's not really rational.
That could be, I think that fits in the normal cognitive understanding, what called cognitive dissonance. And I think it was a Holocaust survivor, Festinger, who came up with the cognitive dissonance, but just when there's a mismatch between how we understand the world and the way the world actually is, that it causes extreme dissonance, that people understand the world to be a certain way that's inaccurate. Mm-hmm. And then when the reality of the world is dissonant with our understanding of the world, it causes pain, because the truth hurts, because so I mean, you could program it in with mental programming. Why do people understand the world in a way that doesn't correspond to the world actually is?
But I think that there's a tipping point here, and I get what that means. Like, for example, there were a lot of people who really hated, George Bush, and there were a lot of people who hated Obama, and there was something reasonable about that. However, I mean, they didn't like Bush for reasons of policy. The Iraq War, the meltdown, the mortgage meltdown. They didn't like Obama because people perceived him as being too far on the left. And I also think that there is also,
couldn't accept that reality is reality. Whether like a dislike.
Well, there may be a level of cognitive dissonance,
like a derangement. Like, I can't accept that reality is reality. I'm going crazy because
no.
reality.
But the point is, there is a level of cognitive dissonance with all of that, and sometimes it reaches a point where people can get very hot under the collar, as we know. And it also can include a personal dislike. People don't like Obama personally, or they don't think they do, or they don't like Bush personally, or they don't like Reagan personally, or they didn't like, Nixon or Clinton or any leader. But there's something a little different about Trump that doesn't quite fit into the category. There's something more going on here, that people seem to be physically affected, and they seem to be mentally affected. And I mean, I don't know, you probably haven't seen this because you kind of travel in anti-Trump circles generally. I mean, I'm not saying specifically, but I live in a world where you have people who are that upset and ill and angry over Trump, and they don't know why.
Even my parents yell at the TV. Like, God forbid, my parents have letters after the name, successful doctor and lawyer, but they yell at Trump caused them to yell at the TV.
Well, maybe they have the same phenomena, but the thing is that the thing that there are certain tails aspects of this, certain tells, if you will, and one of them is that if you try to talk to them about why, they can't answer that question, and they start to blubber with a lot of idiotic fruit salad. There's nothing, he's mean, I don't know. There's nothing rational about it. And it's so, in a sense, as you say, intelligent people with PhDs. I know people like that too, who are completely unhinged if you discuss even, anything about it.
And so Israel and Palestine, except this became mass across America, where typical Israel Palestine's a contentious issue, and
right.
But when it comes to the president or Americans losing normalcy, where just the President Trump is Israel Palestine.
Well, no, Israel and Palestine, there's some real issues. I mean, that people can take sides on. I personally do take a side on that. And I would argue
Trump became like that for many Americans. For years, it was bringing up Israel, Palestine,
but Israel and Palestine, there are rational differences of opinion there. Whereas with Trump, it's not rational. That's my point. There's nothing real there. There's something almost programmed about it. And it makes me think or look into the possibility that this is the culmination of what President Trump called the deep state.
There's something real there. I was saying that people this is not who we are. And this man cannot be our president. This is not who we are.
Yeah, but they don't know why that
Israel, Palestine.
Why is
okay? You like Trump, you defend him. But I mean, the reason why it's because people are just this is not who we are. This man cannot be our president.
The question is, they can't answer the question as to why that isn't who they are. The bottom line is this. I break it down into two groups. And one of them is
because the way he acts, they think should be unacceptable.
Yeah, but the thing is,
you can't act like that and get away with it. But here's Trump acting like that and getting away with it. So, I mean, if you're complicating something relatively
I'm simplifying. Simple. I'm saying that the way he acts would be acceptable if it wasn't for this extra thing going on. Even though he doesn't act like the normal politician, he doesn't speak. He's not. It's the first president in history that was not a politician, actually. So yeah, he is different, but that doesn't explain this kind of reaction. And as I say, I break it down into two groups, what I call the witting and the unwitting. The witting are people who really do hate Trump and know why they hate Trump. And the reason they hate Trump is because they're globalists, because they've worked since, and I go back in history to the election of Woodrow Wilson in 1912, when you had this internationalist, elitist infrastructure put in place, where you had a transfer of governing powers from elected people to these appointed bureaucracies and these super wealthy figures, which eventually spread out all over the world. I mean, I go back to the Rhodes Roundtable, and you could people trace it back to the Illuminati. I don't go that far back, but the point is that they became enthroned in the United States in the election of 1912. They've built up this incredible infrastructure of control. I get into some details of what that is, and that Donald Trump was a direct threat to that, not only personally, but because he threatened to wake up Americans to our own agency under God, our own sovereignty. and the fact that we don't need this infrastructure, and then to bring us back to our ideals. And that was a real threat to their power and their wealth. And so they wanted to take Trump back. They wanted to take him out. They did hate Trump, and they knew why. But that's only a tiny, tiny segment of people involved in this. The vast majority of people who hate Trump don't know why, and that includes very intelligent people. They don't know why. I would suggest because the people that do know why have mastered functions of mass mind control. Now, I go back to the Nazis in this, because if you look at Hitler and the way the Nazis had those rallies, like the one at Nuremberg, it was filmed by Leni Riefenstahl, the great filmmaker. What they would do would be, it was studied by psychologists, they would deprive the crowd of all their senses, because they would create certain smells, they'd create certain visuals with fire, they would create sensations. They always do them at night. They had massive speakers creating certain sounds. You know, in that case, they play Wagner, and there would be this collective experience where people would lose themselves, and they would become entranced and hypnotized to the point where they would build and they would build. And Hitler knew how to do this brilliantly in terms of how he would speak, and how the speech, he'd start off with a whisper, and then gradually he would build. And then by the end, he'd be screaming and arms flying, and women were having orgasms. I mean, people were passing out. And there was like a collective experience that can only be described as the manipulated mind control. And it affected that entire nation. Now, I think that those techniques were learned by the establishment. They don't do it that bluntly. They don't have it. I mean, with Obama, they did a little bit. I mean, women were passing out when Obama would show up. But
well, it was Trump that actually had the rallies. If you talk like
he
media,
did, but they weren't that. But David, did you ever attend? Did you ever attend a Trump rally, David?
No,
Well, I have.
When he came here and people,
no, I have attended. They are not like that, David. I've gone to Trump rallies. They are not people, goose stepping along and everybody's in a state of hypnosis. Quite the opposite. You have people at the Trump rallies who might be a little rough around the edges, but for the most part, they are fully conscious people. They're not like, oh, that isn't what Trump is about. And the fact that they say that is a massive example of projection, because they are projecting onto Trump and people that admire him, and they admire him with a lot of criticism. It's not like with Obama, it's almost a worship, frankly. There's not that with Trump. So I'm saying that from more than a little experience with this thing. And it's really, in a way, it's similar to the people that admired Ronald Reagan. I mean, Reagan was admired, but he wasn't worshipped. People were critical of Reagan. You don't get that much from the right and amongst conservatives. That's a leftist thing, where they put people up like they're gods. I mean, we could go back to the days when the king, the emperor, was God.
Mass rallies. I mean, Bernie Sanders had some.
Sanders,
but Trump is really the only person that had mass rallies. Like, I mean, even Obama.
But they weren't that kind of mass rally. They weren't like done like that. And I think that Bernie Sanders also was not that kind of figure either. And he had big rallies. People who followed Bernie Sanders actually were very similar to people who followed Trump. There were people who admired what he was doing and what he stood for, but they were not like worship. It wasn't like a worshipful thing like what Obama had, and what is being manipulated. So I think that what's happened is that you had this inverse of, rather than creating a hero worship, they created a hysteria of hate without any kind of sound reasoning. I mean, can you imagine this idea that Trump is an anti-Semite? Really? I mean, he was the most, not putting aside the fact that he has Jewish grandchildren, he was the most pro-Israel president since Truman. I mean, it was idiotic.
If you're ignoring the obvious, I'm interested to see your research, but it's saying like Trump said things that most people think shouldn't be allowed to be said. So just the basic dissonance, like
who allows that of it? Who decides? First of all,
from a certain people who suffer Trump derangement syndrome is just like for example, okay, I've seen it many, like, I was telling a story in New York of two friends, and the guy just started publicly ragging on the guy for being homosexual, calling him, like, the F word, and it's saying, like, you can't do that, but it's but he did it, and it's saying, well, it's pretty common. Like, I remember, people aren't really nice to each other, but like within certain circles, they're like, no, you can't do that. Like, I've never even seen anyone do that. If someone did that, like, he would be completely banned and would never be invited back. And Trump was like, did these type things where in certain cultural things, like, you can't do it and get away with that. And even like anti-Semitic, you say, Trump's not anti-Semitic, but he said things that people think shouldn't be allowed to be said.
No, he didn't.
And that's what caused the derangement.
Those were lies.
Been programmed by the media too.
Yes, it was. Those things were lies that were made up by a media that was involved in this Trump derangement creation.
Saying it over and over again, but because he said things and did things that the average person thought wasn't possible.
No, it was crafted that way and phrased in that way that would make it look like that by a media that was putting something under a microscope and then enlarging it, taking it out of context and saying, you see, he doesn't like Jews, or some ridiculous thing like that. And in a way, you see how, wait a minute, let me just say this. You see how the left criticizes, and I'm critical of what's called the QAnon conspiracy theories, but that is exactly what they did. The criticism, the craziness about QAnon, whoever is behind that, who knows, is that they'll take out a microscope and they'll look at some minute thing that people looked a certain way, or they said a certain thing, and they create this whole conspiracy theory around it. That is how they try to prove that Trump has something against Jews. I mean, he was standing on a stage, and off to the right there was this little thing that looked like a swastika or something. You see, I mean, this is
come on, be real. Like, he said things, like, you don't have to watch Adam Green to, like, he said things that generally aren't allowable to be said. He said that Jews control the Congress. He said that American Jews hate Israel. He said various things that generally are beyond the pale. And tell me
what he said about.
Say that mean he's an anti-Semite. Okay, that doesn't mean.
So then tell me what he said about the Jews controlling the Congress, and putting aside the fact that is something that's been said by it was said by Clinton, and it was said by a lot of people. But putting that aside, what did he say about that?
Because I don't news clip. He's interviewed by the Jewish radio show where he said Jews used to control the Congress and we don't anymore.
And don't anymore.
And I think he said a lot of things like like
put that into context.
Like, he didn't need our money. He made a lot of comments.
That
are generally forbidden to be made. And so the person saying, like, you can't do that and get away with it, and it caused derangement because he did it and got away with it.
It depends on the context. He probably, if he said that about Congress, he was probably saying that about the fact that Congress has been traditionally very pro-Israel, and that's
he meant that Jews, give a lot of money and have a lot of control of congressmen. Which to say, like, okay, if you say that's I say it like that.
I've heard you say
like the reason America supports Israel is because the hard work of American Jewish lobbyists and like the fact.
Yeah, I've heard you say that. I don't agree with that, but I don't think that makes anyone an anti-Semite. I think that we've discussed this. I think Americans support Israel because they want to do. They support something.
People like me and you do a lot of hard work to convince people to do something that may not.
No, I don't think it's. I think it's. Yes, that's what you say. I think it's more organic.
People write big checks.
No, see, you're the one who's now saying this stuff.
I'm saying that factually. I'm saying as a Jew that the reason they support Israel is because Jews write big checks.
No, I don't agree. I think people support Israel because they support Israel. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people who try to put money behind pro-Israel groups and pro-Israel ads and that kind of thing. We could look at who they are, but that's almost not. That's beside the point. The fact is that the vast majority of Americans, all the way from the creation of Israel both liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, have supported Israel's right to exist. Now, they may not agree about every little thing that in that, some people want the two-state solution, whatever it is. They don't like Netanyahu, fine. But
I'm saying more like philo-Semitic, because of the hard work of American Jews that make it that way. And if
I don't think that
American
is
Jews
it.
didn't
No,
do that
I
hard
don't
work,
think American
that the
Jews.
support of Israel wouldn't be there.
I disagree. I think that the American people.
That includes writing checks.
Well, that's part of it, but I think that's a very small part of it. And we may disagree here. I think that Americans support Israel as Christians. And I think they support Israel because Israel should be supported, because America supports the right of nations to have sovereignty, because Americans are sympathetic to Jews in a broad sense.
Or as a favor to people like me and you. They do it as a favor to people like me and you.
I don't think they're giving
it. We didn't reach out and ask him to do that favor.
No, I don't agree. I don't think Americans are doing anyone any favors. They're
doing people like me and you a favor who ask them.
No, I don't think so. I think that Americans support Israel for very organic reasons. They support Israel.
Like me and you asked them to.
No, I think they support Israel for the same reason they support France. I mean, they support.
They don't really support France. They support Israel because people like me and you make a big deal and ask them.
You and I disagree on that. I don't think so. I think that Israel is just supported in America historically. It goes back. It goes back to Ulysses Grant. It goes back to, probably, there was talk about.
You're not involved in pro-Israel activism. So I was saying they support Israel due to the work of pro-Israel activists.
Yeah, I mean, of course, that's part of it. But I think that it wouldn't have happened if there wasn't this overall organic support for Israel amongst Americans, including Americans who don't particularly like Jews. I mean, because it has there's certain mystical aspects to that. There's religious aspects to it. There are nationalist aspects to it. It's a very complicated issue, but I do think that the American people, even if we don't agree on a lot of other things, generally have been supportive of Israel. So, to say that the Jews are, if Trump said that, shame on him, but it's not like something that everyone's going to get their hair on fire over, because you get plenty of liberal people saying that.
Your local AIPAC deliverer said that. It's like, they're not, unless you write this check out for AIPAC,
then what are you
going to turn against us? And it's not that they like us. It's because we raise the money and we lobby them. And if you don't write the check out, they're not going to support us.
Fine, but I still think
isn't that what the Jewish lobbyists tell us?
That's what all lobbyists tell you. And I think
ADL, they say, like, if you don't write this check, like it's going to be bad.
That's what any lobbyist tells you. I get lobby groups. When I ran for office, I got lobby pitches like that from left, right, and center. You get lobbyists, you get people from Planned Parenthood saying, if you don't support us, the women are going to go back to coat hangers in the alley. I mean, that's just classic fundraising and lobbying.
I'll give you an update on the primaries.
Okay.
I mean, because there's a lot to talk about, repeat this argument, but, certainly the primaries, in my parents' district, Haley Stevens and Andy Levin, just this week, more support, more money. They're just a Jewish fundraiser, $400,000 for Haley Stevens.
I don't know anything about that.
By Jewish Democrats, and specifically because she was willing to take a stronger stance for Israel than Andy Levin, specific to, and even the AIPAC, Democracy Now! Is Amy Goodman was you mentioning this,
well, Amy Goodman is one of those who would probably say the Jews control Congress. I mean,
she's an opponent of the Israeli lobby, but was mentioning that AIPAC is supporting at this point a majority of people that think that the election was stolen from Trump, and that AIPAC is supporting a more extreme, so to say, batch of candidates. And the Iran deal right now it's likely that Biden's going to go into it. And so just this week there was a letter of Democratic support against the Iran deal, and that was one of the AIPAC support that
well, good. That's a particular
Democratic primaries were coming out against the Iran deal. Made a difference.
And I think that's a particular policy. By the way,
fundraisers.
Yeah, and I think the Secretary of State Blinken has now said that he does
say someone like, okay, Haley Stevens, maybe she believes it, maybe not, or maybe we did a fundraiser and we did the fundraiser.
Looked of it. I
And
mean,
because we did it, she came out against the Iran deal. And had we not, she would have been for the Iran deal.
yeah, but
And
we're
it cost
talking
us- it
that,
cost
that
our
may
local
be.
Jewish community $400,000 to get Haley Steven to oppose the Iran deal. And if you're a local Jew
look,
and
though,
wrote a check,
that's-
it did.
yeah,
It
but
cost
that's
us
just
$400,000 to get Haley Stevens to oppose the
Right.
Iran deal.
And it was worth every penny of it. Look, that's just politics. You can get this pro Armenian group spends money trying to get politicians to agree that there had been genocide by Turkey. You
But
know,
that's the way our system works. You call
that's
it
that's right.
like,
I mean,
it's
that's
not like even Republic, or they really feel that way. It's like, no, we had to do a lot of work. We had to pay them a lot of money
that's
to get
inside.
them to change their opinion.
That's
You call it
that's
anti-Semitic, but
not-
that's the way our system works. And
I don't
you
think
could
it's
say
anti. I don't say it's anti.
you could look at the fundraisers that we do for people.
And we could look at, by the way, the Muslim fundraisers who are trying to switch it the other way, like from CARE and ISNA, and people that are trying to buy chairs at some of the major elite colleges that are coming from, which
So
have.
if you're pro-Israel and concerned about this, you factually have to write bigger checks than them, or they're going to turn against us.
Look, first of all, I don't know. I get that, and that may be true in particular specific policy issues like the Iran boycott. But in the end of the day, the American people organically support Israel, and politicians support Israel because they want to get elected and because they know their constituents care about that. Just like, in a sense, it's like in Massachusetts, you'd have trouble getting elected unless you're pro-choice on abortion, because that's where most people in my state are. So people have changed their position on that. Not because they're getting
That's the
money
issue
from
that
their
the
own,
Jewish community
although
cares
they might
about.
be, but because
If you want Jewish support, if you're Democrat, you're going to get the Jewish vote either way. If you want
it's not Jewish
money,
support.
if you want
It's the
Jewish
majority
money,
of
you have
American
to cave in
people.
on certain
How many-
issues
what
that our community
percentage-
cares about.
What percentage of this country is Jewish? Maybe 2%, 1%?
It depends on the district, but I was saying in districts, that
Even
you're
the-
generally,
even the
if you're a
Jewish-
Democrat, you're going to get the Jewish support basically no matter what. But in terms of getting the Jewish
Not necessarily.
money, you're going to have to cave into certain issues, and they may not be popular, like Iran.
No, but that's
So a
fine, but
typical
that
Democrat
happens.
is saying like, no, it cost our community a large amount of money.
And they ought to cough it up. But the point is that's how politics works. As I've said, one of the big, look at the unions. The biggest political contributors in this country are big unions. And they have an agenda. They have certain things they want to see done, and they'll give money or they'll pull money away. Their power has almost as much to do, not just with money, but with feet on the ground and with what's called in-kind support. They can send out volunteers to man telephones and to go out and drive people to the polls and hold up signs. I mean, so each of these special interests, as they call them, have their own powers within politics. It's not just the people that support Israel. It's, that's just how politics works. But at the end of the day, as I said, you're not going to get an entire population to shift one way or the other because somebody spends money. I mean, you could take a look at the last election, like Michael Bloomberg. He spent, I think it was $100 million out of his own pocket. It might have been more than that. And he didn't get a single delegate. So all the money in the world isn't going to make people change their opinion about something. Whereas you had Trump, who spent practically nothing and who none of the big donors gave him a nickel, and he won.
The point of votes, but you could sway issues like, so to say, Iran, like Sheldon Adelson, in large sums of money, like Republicans who hardly have any Jews in their district, but came out against Iran. You say maybe because that's the way they felt, or maybe
that's right. It's because what the constituents
paid
want.
them, and in return they swayed their vote.
And most people don't know even where Iran is, and they don't care, but they do know where Israel is, and people, regardless of
we send them there, they know where it is because we pay to send them there.
But that's where you have the money come in, because people don't have a particular strong
People
opinion.
don't know where Israel is if we didn't pay to send them there.
No. Well, that's right. Israel does a good job of promoting itself. But the point is that Israel has always
Not Israel American Jews, not Israel American Jews do that work.
Do American Jews do the birthright? Is that what you're talking about?
Not that I'm saying that Israel doesn't bring the politicians, American Jews that
American
send the
Jews,
politicians to
and
Israel.
it's brilliant. Look, David, I don't want to go around the merry-go-round. We should go to another subject. I just want to say that again, Israel has, no matter how much money is spent on any side, it has an organic support amongst the American people. That has been proven in poll after poll. We could go back to George Washington. The American people support Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. They are generally Zionist. You know, maybe there are different levels of it, but at the end of the day, both liberal and conservative, Democrat and Republican, left and right, even the Communist Party was pro-Zionist. I mean, you could take a look at some of their articles in the forward. They're like, look, we think we support the right of the Palestinians and blah, 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 blah. But the idea of questioning Israel's right to exist is something we support. That's not even on the table.
I mean, we're differentiating. I'm saying it's through the hard work of American Jews. And even though maybe most but of the American Jews that care, it's not organic support. It's really exclusively due to the effort of a minority of American Jews. It's not organic. And
I mean, among Jews?
It's exclusive to the effort of the American Jews that care about Israel.
So you're saying that amongst American Jews, support for Israel is not organic?
No, I'm saying that among the American political support is not because support of Israel is organic. It's largely...
I disagree. So we've talked about this.
Largely the result of the effort of the American Jews who care about the issue.
And I disagree. So we've talked about that. I think it is organic. I think, yes, you have American Jews who are very strongly active and who do put money up, put their money where their mouth is.
Well, not just money, but all sorts of activism besides money is one of the biggest factors, but not just money, but it's saying they like the American. It's not that they like Israel, they like the American Jews, and they know that this issue is important to.
And that may be true of
the American
politicians.
Jews like.
But again, I think at the end of the day, they support Israel because their constituents support Israel and they want to get elected. Anyway, David, there's some very bad news in Israel right now, and we really can't walk around.
We talked about terrorism last week, so God forbid. Today, was another terrorist attack. As far as I know, the terrorist is on the run, and there's a manhunt.
Yeah, and Tel Aviv is locked down. And this one's
they claim that there were 15 foiled attacks before today. That they went into various cities in Jenin. A few people were killed. Police officers were shot, and security. And they claim that it's tough to know the Israeli claims, but they claim that they stopped 15
I don't doubt it.
separate attacks that would have turned into something like this. And then today, the first time in a week.
It's an attempt to kill all the Jews they can. And, this also...
Specifically, the Israel Bennett had said that there were 15 separate attacks where the person was with a gun on the way to do something like this and was foiled.
Look, David, it seems like this happened.
The riots in Jerusalem. I mean, the Ramadan prayers. So
that's
there's two separate things. There's this terrorist attacks, and then there's the riots related to the Ramadan prayers, which are of a different nature. That
I'm not sure it is different.
Much more
I think that it seems like every year around Ramadan, this kind of thing happens. Not just in Israel either, by the way, but in Muslim countries around the world, where you have murders and slaughter and violence. And mayhem and massacres, and I don't know.
Separate factors. There's the actual Al-Aqsa Mosque and the fact that tens of thousands of Muslims go to pray at the
right.
The Al-Aqsa Mosque on Ramadan, and they have to go through Israeli security, and there's conflict related to the control of the Temple Mount and the security related to Jerusalem that may or may not have anything to do with just crowd control, but it causes problems. And then there's probably just the incentive that there's more likely the fervor to carry out a terrorist attack during this period. But so there's the last year, the rocket attacks were related to things happening on the Temple Mount in Sheikh Jarrah. And so it's just the beginning of Ramadan. If tens of thousands of people go every night, by the end of Ramadan, it'll be 100,000 people going to Al-Aqsa.
That's very dangerous. I get it. I mean,
And everyone's saying that it's probably, it's only 1 week into Ramadan now.
how many weeks is Ramadan, for God's sakes?
It's a whole month. Man, people are fasting all day. So, and we're only a week into Ramadan now. And, so, I mean, God forbid, and there's more news out of Israel that, like, we could have Netanyahu back as prime minister. I'm not sure if you saw that. The Yamina party, Bennett's party, his whip, the woman, quit the coalition.
Yes, I
they're
did.
down to 60, and if one other person quit the coalition, it'd be 59. So I the details, as they say, I'll try to say very quickly. If they call for new elections, then Bennett will no longer be prime minister, and it'll actually be Lapid, because he was the one who was called the coalition. It's his coalition. So if the government breaks down and they call for new elections, that the prime ministership would actually immediately switch to Lapid, but actually pass over. So it's unlikely they could do that. They could also call the vote of no confidence, which takes 61 votes. So with the one defector, it's only 60. And, so there's been another person from his party. So ironically, the defection happened over Passover, where the woman, the Liberal coalition, she was demanding that hospitals don't have chametz. So Israel, they have a liberal secular coalition, and, generally they want to make it illegal to have chametz in Israeli hospitals over Passover. And that caused her to leave the coalition, because she was demanding no chametz in hospitals. And now one of his other West Bank members is making ultimatums, like he has to do things for the settlements or he's going to leave the coalition. So if they called a vote of no confidence, then they wouldn't need to go to election, and they could form a new coalition. And so that's why I said, if one more person defected, Netanyahu could be prime minister next week. And they even had a rally outside of the Knesset. So, like, ironically, Netanyahu could be
maybe
back.
that's going to make Bennett step up and start to do something about these terrorists.
Really do anything. I mean, it's Lapid's coalition. Bennett, it's his own, his own small party that only had a handful of people that are defecting.
I understand.
I mean, no one likes him. Not even the people.
They're going to do it over the issue of chametz at hospitals. It's interesting. I mean, I hope that doesn't happen. I mean, I hope that government holds it together. Israel doesn't need the kind of instability right now.
Well, we might be. I mean, ironically, we could be more stable under Netanyahu, and
I don't know. I don't think so. But I guess, I mean, I don't know enough about the dynamic there. I mean, my interest in this is that with the terrorism going on there, I mean, I have cousins in Israel. I haven't spoken to them about this. But I mean, is that how is that really going to be destabilizing for Israel as a nation and as a people? That's what terrorism is for. That's why terrorism.
Yeah, I mean, the Israel that they're used to, that's like what's happening in terms of that is, God forbid, normal. And even you mentioned like guns.
Yeah, but it's not so normal. It's not so normal it's not so normal to have that happen in Tel Aviv on Dizengoff Street at night when people are out having dinner. That's not normal, and that's very damaging to Israel.
Last year, 25% of Israelis for a month were regularly going into bomb shelters. Like, I mean, God forbid.
But in Tel Aviv,
Israel's at war. That's normal. Last just a year ago, people were spending every other day in bomb shelters.
I know, but it's damaging for Israel's image as a tourist destination, quite frankly.
I don't think that's not actually destabilizing to Israel.
I know, but
it's bad as war. People are dying. It's not pleasant, but that's not.
But I think of Tel Aviv as the sort of the place where Israelis and with people all over the world go to have fun, to relax. It's a beautiful waterfront, and they've got this great restaurants and stores, and it's kind of like to have it happen
where they were going into bomb shelters every other day for a month
in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, because God forbid the bombs were, but it was just a year ago where people in Tel Aviv, even in Tel Aviv, were going into bomb shelters every
I mean, I guess it's
that is normal. I mean, God forbid that is normal in Israel. That's why I said it's not even considered anti-Semitism. It's normal there. It's expected saying it's Ramadan, it's expected that this is going to happen.
God
If you're an
damn.
American Jew, it's like, oh, is it, they say, no, Israel, this is
Israel,
expected. It's
yeah,
what they go
it's just,
through every year.
it's sickening.
And it could be a little bit worse.
They can't have their, be Jewish citizens living peaceably in their own friggin' country. They have to have people show up to kill Jews. It's just so sickening, and it's so.
And that's the normal that Israel's had for decades.
It's been a
I
normal.
mean, it's sickening to you as an American Jew.
No, it's
Israeli,
sickening.
that's the reality that they've always known.
I know it is, and I mean, having been, we both have been to Israel. I've been to Israel a few times, and I've noticed that the Israeli people.
Yeah, the Sbarro bombing was there when I was there.
Yeah, I mean, when I was there, you had some other stuff going on.
And, gas. We had gas masks.
The gas masks. That's right, with Saddam Hussein. Yeah,
but that's the normal that Israelis have.
Yeah, that I agree with you in that the Israeli people are like, they're moving along. They're not thinking about it. They're getting on with their life as if nothing's happening, and they have
Russia. The situation in Syria is destabilizing. The current terrorist wave is definitely bad, but it's not actually destabilizing to Israel.
Okay, thank God. But I know
about Ukraine and Russia, like that would in the Iran.
Well,
deal,
that's a real war, a real ground war.
Yeah, saying like, okay, you don't want to have to go into bomb shelters or be scared to go out because of crime, but it's not actually something that destabilizes Israel. It's just something that makes the life of Israelis much less uncomfortable. And so they're ready for it. They know that's been the normal. They're trained.
Yeah, no, they are, and they have a certain psychology where they just.
We as Americans aren't
they don't think about it, and it's almost like it's not happening. And I think there's a coping mechanism there. What's going on in Ukraine, David, on your information?
God forbid, like I was trying to look into this. It's very tough to know, like, okay, so they pulled out completely from Kiev, and are ramping up some actions in the Donbass and
I think that they've created a corridor between the. They've kind of accomplished what they set out to do. They've created a corridor between the Crimea and the Donbass region by taking Mariupol, and they also released the water from the Ukrainians were denying water to Crimea. They were diverting water, and I guess that the Russians have restored the water. And the water is now
Ukrainians fighting in almost all of those cities. So even Mariupol, there's still
fighting,
if not thousands of Ukrainian forces that are still fighting. So there was, I forget, it was Mullen, a U.S. general, that stepped up and changed the narrative. Like, God forbid, he said that despite what we've been being told, he's estimating that 4,000 Russians have been killed and 15,000 Ukrainians have been killed, even though they've been reporting numbers in the opposite.
Right. And
then there's the big question of now they're claiming that there could be as many as 5,000 dead civilians in Mariupol, and there's this, the war crime, like, God forbid, that it's just horrible. People, hands bound behind their back and shot in the head, hundreds of them. And I've been reading these articles, like, Biden saying war crime, and Russia's saying that it's the Ukrainians who did it, and that these people who were killed were Russian, were Ukrainians that favored Russia, and and they were killed by Ukrainians.
It's hard to know, David. It's a war.
And even Biden saying, like, no, it was the Russian troops that did it, and it's a war crime. And so it's really, it's really tough to know. I tried to look into it, and the information is just limited. It's like, like, I don't have any, dog in this. Say my background's Ukrainian, Jewish, going back 200 years, but it's tough to know. And saying, like,
it is.
Ukraine, was it a good idea arming these people? We're still arming them. If the numbers come out and it changes that they were lying to us, in reality is the Ukrainians were losing all the time, and over 20,000 Ukrainians have already been killed. And
it seems like it's kind of stabilizing.
This goes on 2 years.
But it seems like
in the Donbass, even they pull out that the Ukrainian holdouts that are willing to fight, it'll be years. Like, even Mariupol, as long as there's
that may be
Ukrainian are willing to fight,
it seems like the borders
for the Russians to weed them out.
Seems like the borders are stabilizing. It looks like Russia has withdrawn from Kiev, and they're not really touching the western part of Ukraine.
Millions of people, like if there's hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that have guns and are willing to fight to the death, they'll take years. There's nothing
Yeah, the point
militarily.
is, it
It's just
doesn't
like
seem like-
Palestine. I mean, you agree that there's nothing. If there's if there's hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians that are going to fight to the end with guns, it's going to take years.
Yeah, but it seems like the borders have somewhat stabilized at this point. Russia has withdrawn from the region around Kyiv, and they've stabilized in the Donbass and along the shore around Crimea, which was really what their goal was anyways. And I think that they're going to reach a kind of a stalemate.
Depends on how many weapons. I'm saying that, and if you add,
Yeah, but it's pretty clear
like the
that the
sending of
Western
weapons.
democracies are not going to come in and help Ukraine directly. That Ukraine made a pitch recently. I think that that Zelensky actually said in a broadcast that he demanded that Russia be kicked out of the UN Security Council, which would be I would think that would be a disaster, because that'll be World War III. That'll be thermonuclear war if that happens, and it's not going to happen. And the point is that I think
they got kicked out of the Human Rights Council. Even Israel.
Fine, but human rights,
that
great.
doesn't really matter that much.
What was
but
it, run
that
by?
happened today, kick him out of the Human Rights.
That doesn't mean anything. It was run by Somalia, I think. The point is that the Security Council, that's a different matter, and I think that it's quite clear that the West is not going to go in with boots on the ground to help Ukraine. So there's going to be a stalemate, and we can only hope that the only wild card in this whole thing is if Biden opens his friggin' mouth and creates a nuclear war. So I think if he just shuts up and lets his puppets run the show, we'll be okay. But I don't think that
we could cause Russia a huge headache by just giving weapons. So I'm saying,
yeah, but I'm not sure that that's.
If we collectively, as the West, stop giving Ukraine weapons, it would probably be over in a few weeks.
Fine. I'm not sure that Russia's going to.
They'll carry on basically as long as we keep them giving them
Russia
weapons.
is not going to sit back for that either. I mean, if Russia sees major, it's one thing to send in regular weaponry, but if they see anything major come in, they're going to bomb it, and they already have. They already destroyed airfields that were being used to land things. I mean, they're not going to just sit back for it. But at the same, so I think that it's
So it may
reaching.
be comparable to like Israel and Syria, but like bombing Iranian shipments through Syria to.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
I saw those shoulder-mounted, those like tank busters cost like $200,000, and one of those rockets cost like $60,000 each. And so if it's from the West, it's like that's if it hits that you're giving a few $100,000 to help them destroy Russian tanks. And even if it's shipments of them.
Yeah, but I don't think Russia's going to sit back for that. And Russia has a lot of tanks. Russia has about 10 times the number of tanks as Western Europe. And I think that they've only put forth their inferior tanks so far. They've been holding back on the vast majority of their tanks. So, and I think the Ukrainians understand that, and the West understands it. Now the Russian ruble has rebounded because
it's not like Iran giving weapons to Hezbollah. If we give those tank busters to Ukraine, chances are they can hold off the further incursion. Like
I think they will, and I hope we do. But
if we give thousands and thousands of those,
they're not going to be
Ukraine, which we're doing. We are doing that.
Yeah, but
they could probably hold the tanks from going further.
Yeah, and that's as I said, David. They've reached a stalemate where I think that Ukraine will be able to preserve its position in the western part of the country and around Kiev and Dnipropetrovsk and Odessa, and it will, and Russia will hold on to their positions, and the thing will reach an ugly truce, but the world will basically not go to the brink of a nuclear war, because the idea of having a war with Russia is insane. I mean, that's the end of the world. Russia has superior nuclear
flights to Russia last week. Lapid denounced Putin as a war criminal. Like I said, the UN, which is controlled by Lapid, not Bennett, the vote voted against Russia. Lieberman, of the Yisrael Beiteinu Russian-speaking party, refused to take sides or denounce Putin, and Israel has officially resumed flights back and forth to Russia. So like as of now,
Well, Israel has a
are
relation.
Israelis. I'm not sure how much, but I think they said 54 flights a day or something that are between Israel and Russia.
Israel has its
regularly,
own
and that's been
relations with
resumed.
Russia that goes way back. They
It's
have
not, Russia's a huge territory, like business wise.
of
Like
course.
Ukraine was open and a door to, like I said, the computer. But I mean, Russia's a huge
Oh, yeah.
territory. There's
And I
probably
also
more
think that
business
Russia
between
and Israel
Israel and Russia
they have a
than the
tacit
U.S.
military agreement with regard to Syria that when Israel stops Hezbollah from moving tanks in, they usually do it in conjunction with Russia. That there
There's
is
been a lot of defection also of Jews from Russia to Israel, and Russia hasn't stopped that. So like it's been in the news multiple
that's right.
defections of Russian Jews that have
Look, it's a
left
natural
Russia for Israel. But as I said, the support, relatively, they resumed flights, and it said it was like 54 flights a day are going
sure.
between
It's a
Israel and
natural
Russia.
alliance that goes all the way back to Israel's independence with, quite frankly, with Stalin. So, I mean, Israel's always had a relationship with Russia, and that's to their advantage. I mean, that's their right. That's their business. Anyway, David, but I don't think it's going to devolve into a world war like I thought it
I
would.
doubt it. I mean, I think even it's going to disappear from the news cycle. Even like I said, it might go on for years, and it's probably going to quickly disappear from the news cycle, especially as they start
Agree.
coming out that what they've been telling us. Like I said, Mullen came out and they were telling us like 15,000 Russians have been killed and only a few thousand Ukrainians. And really, it's the opposite. And it might be worse. Like God forbid,
We don't know what the story is.
the casualties that the Ukrainians have been taking might even be in the tens of thousands, and that might, so to say, like, bust the will of the Ukrainians to keep on fighting, and
I don't
certainly
think the
less right
Ukrainians
now
will stop
to
fighting for their
so
country.
they'll just
They shouldn't.
disappear from the news cycle and they'll
It
stop talking.
will, and Ukraine will continue to fight for their country, and I think Russia will.
Really need our weapons too, so that
And
has
Russia
to.
will dig its heels in and preserve its position, and they'll have an ugly stalemate. Anyway, David, what do you have coming up on your show this week or next week?
Nothing planned. I thought to reach out to this John David Ebert to speak about Joseph Campbell and
Oh yeah, great. I like Joseph.
but I didn't do that. The Science of Consciousness conference is over, Passover. It's like $300. So I want to think it comes with 2 Zoom links and a chat. So I might you do that. I was on these London channels this week. This like Pan-Africanist who was talking about Islam, and this other woman. Some interesting conversations about Islam, and we were even talking about this Syrian Bedouin. We're talking today about Israel and Ramadan violence and what's happening in Israel, and God forbid, that was my assessment, is that Israel became more stable with more Arab Muslim partners, but the situation with the Palestinians, it became less stable. But in terms of stabilization of Israel, that's more important, the relations with the armies and the nations, but the violence is likely to increase, so that God forbid, there's just going to be more crime, more violence, and Israel's are going to have to put up with that. But at the same time, Israel is in a more stable space with stronger relations with its neighboring countries.
God willing. So good, David. Thanks
Well,
so
it's
much.
good and bad at the same time.
Well, yes, but thank goodness
just to
they
put up with the high
have to put
levels
up
of
with the
violence
Jew
within the
haters,
country.
but they have like a better relationship with other Arab countries. I mean, I find the whole subject to be pretty depressing, but I just pray that that the Israeli people are safe. David, listen, thanks for joining me as always.
Okay, yeah, look forward to your book, and hopefully next week, if you get your book out, try to read it. And I meant here in Michigan, there's a abortion, they think the Supreme Court case is going to be overturned, and I guess there's a law in the books, actually, like an old law that makes abortion illegal, that they're trying to get rid of quickly. And saying it's a month away, the primaries. So right here, Rashida Tlaib looks like she'll be coasting in, easy win. But the
Any opponent? Does she have any opposition?
She has some opposition, but they're not big names. They're not polling it,
How is
anywhere.
Matt Toperno doing?
Who?
Matt Toperno is a candidate for Secretary of State in Michigan.
I have to look. I mean, I would assume that he's got little chance of the incumbent. I mean, she probably has one of the biggest budgets ever in the history of elections for Secretary of State. But
incredible
so
crook.
that primary is coming up, pretty soon. Haley Stevens versus Andy Levins. You've been the biggest story in Passover.
How
next
about
week,
Karamo?
Friday
How's
the
she doing?
Passover Seder. Who?
Karamo. She's running for, I think, Attorney General.
Against Dana Nessel?
Yeah.
I haven't even heard her name. I would assume her chance is extremely low because even though there's a constituents of people that really don't like them, that for relatively low level, like Secretary of State, Attorney General, that these women have garnered national name recognition. It'll be extremely difficult to unseat them.
And I'm not sure that their name recognition is always that positive, but anyway, it'll be interesting to follow.
And
So-
Passover is next Friday, so
Yes, indeed.
clean our house and prepare for the Seder. So yeah, looking forward to your book, and like almost all the information I have on the topic comes from you, because you're the only, I mean, few people, but yeah, it's
I hope
forbidden.
some other
and,
people are talking about this,
no one
especially.
talked about it, and like if they did do it and get away with it, they swept all the evidence under the rug. And
I think that about sizes it up to it. They did do it and they got away with it. All right, so
like at best you could write a book that even just talking about it puts us at risk. But I'll be interested to hear your research, and if you want to talk about it on other formats, we could do that next week or whenever you get it ready.
thank you, David. All right, so I'll talk to you soon. Good Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom.